Hi, I'm Alan Wartes, and you've tuned in to my newest podcast, Audiobooks by Alan Wartes. I'm a storyteller. I always have been. But I admit to being frustrated at times by how hard it is for artists like me to connect with story lovers like you. So I've decided to take matters into my own hands by making my stories available for free as audiobooks. The story you're about to listen to is called The Drive. Not too long from now, most people will head north into a new future. Some will head north into the past. I've got another short story lined up for you called Gravestone. Watch for it. And then soon, I'm very excited to announce the serialized release of my new novel, The Bottle Business. So, subscribe. Come along for the ride. The Drive, a short story by Alan Wartes. Not that long ago, birthdays still meant something. Back before the tip. In those days, a birthday was a big deal, especially to a kid. The song, the balloons, the sugar buzz, some plastic crap. It was all meant to say, "Hey, you're alive, how cool is that?" But even an older cuss like me could usually count on a steak dinner and some expensive booze with friends on their birthday. The subtext in that case was more like, "Wow, you're still here, go figure." Whatever. It was a reason to laugh, to lift a glass. If you were extra lucky, you might share a bed that night with someone willing and warm, and utter a breathless prayer of thanks for their birthday too, whenever that might be. Of all the things the world has lost, your own birthday is one of the hardest to understand. Maybe it's because after everything that's happened, most people can't decide whether being alive is a blessing or a curse, a gift or punishment for the cumulative crimes of humanity. If their own birth only marks arrival in a prison camp, what makes you think they'd want to celebrate yours? Who'd turn up at a festival to honor saints that have fallen from grace? Now we think, you're here, God damn it, just lie low and make the best of it. But I'm not afraid to say it, the best of this is not worth very much. We went from masters of the earth to being crammed into beehives underground, proboscis to stinger, only without the buzz of good nectar, without the honey, without even the dizzy thrill of flight from time to time. Well, that's mostly true. As if to remind me of the rare exceptions, she stirs beside me, waking from a post-pleasure doze. The bed in her tiny hive room is barely suited for one person, but we make it work for an hour or so every week. "You better go," she says, drowsy. "Wait, don't." "Again?" "Yeah, I better go." "Again," she insists. Busy afternoon. She doesn't know it's my birthday. She only knows it's Tuesday, the day I usually work in her sector, keeping the sparks in line. Turns out, electrons are more valuable than ever in the tipped world, and electricians, like myself, electron wranglers, I like to say, comprise a sort of mystical priesthood. I come and go as I please, within the walls, of course, so long as all the things that are supposed to glow and hum keep glowing and humming. You'd think the facility's administrators, with their own particular need for reliable amperage, would have long ago taken over the profession. But so far, it's still a man's job. Sorry, a person's job. The job of a biological. I've got a theory about why. A fishy, that's what I call the artificials when they aren't around, a fishy can absorb a complex schematic in some ridiculous fraction of a terasecond. They can precisely predict the negative effect that a dollop of bird dew has on a photovoltaic tile, given the area it covers and its relative opacity in sunlight, of course. But they can't strip a wire for shit. fine motor skill is still not in their specs. Nor do they understand the concept of a workaround. Try explaining there's no need to scrap an entire array simply because the bolt holding it down is starting to strip, and you have no replacement. Just put 4 washers under the nut instead of 1 to lift it to where the threads are still good, and bang, back in business. Speaking of which, I pull away from her soft arm across my chest and rise. I really do have a big day planned. Perhaps because of that, I stand here for a moment and admire one of the most important of all the things the fishies will never understand. Nectar. Spun honey, a reason for living. If you let a machine decide what you should take with you during an emergency evacuation, they'll grab the first aid kit and leave behind your grandfather's collection of 20th century baseball cards, never caring it's the only thing you have left of him. A sweet rosewood Martin acoustic guitar with frets worn shiny and smooth? Forget about it. Guaranteed they'll pack the salt, but not the tequila. They'll load you in the transport, 2 by 2, boy, girl, to ensure the survival of the species, but they'll never, ever, not in eons of geologic time, register the essential value of making love, for no other reason than it feels really good. Way down deep. To both of you if you're doing it right. Saddest of all is that virtually all the persons, in this hole in the ground are starting to think like the fishies in this regard. And the other kind of person, those that are equal but reproductively distinct from the first kind, women are just as confused as the men. Perpetual penance will do that. Hang your head long enough and everything goes limp, even your soul. I think they might be onto you, she says, sitting up. Onto me? I pull on the olive green Charlie in the Jungle style uniform we all wear. No need to ask what they she might be referring to. To whatever you're up to? Up to, I say, innocently. It's probably the boots. I sit and pull a pair of scuffed Tony Lamas out from under the bed. The leather is as lined as elephant skin and infinitely softer. The sole and heel have a few good years left. Miraculously, they fit me. Where on earth did you get them? She asks. So far, she's made no move to cover her marvelous self. I suppose that's at least one benefit the heat has delivered, though I doubt the scene is being repeated anywhere else in the hive. I took him off a dead Mexican, I say. She gasps and reflexively reaches for her uniform, for a place to hide from heresy. She's Eve, suddenly aware of the presence of sin. Are you crazy? We don't say things like that. It's offensive. Offensive. With a capital O. It's a vast word that covers a lot of territory these days. I pull the boots on and stand. The smooth, hardened heels tap lightly on the concrete floor. It's a sassy sound never heard from the foam rubber slippers issued to everyone down here. Which part, I say? That he was dead or that he was Mexican? Stop, she says, and gets up to finish dressing. You're right. You better go. I know exactly what has riled her up, and I confess I did it on purpose. It's my birthday. I can do what I want. But I am grateful that she spares me the standard lecture about privileged microaggression and the structural toxicity of language. Maybe she thinks there's a hard limit to what can be expected of a man in cowboy boots, beyond tuning up her spark plugs every Tuesday. She could be right. She moves me to the door, but I block her from opening it. Wait, I like you, I say, wanting to somehow mark this departure. She stares back at me. Electrons are electrons no matter where they're found, And I know I've triggered a stampede of them in her brain while she calculates my possible motives for such an unsolicited statement and the likely consequences of her available responses. We're in the danger zone of gender role regression. The tip, you see, has had the effect of canceling all traditional social contracts between people. While it reset the Earth's atmosphere to a new state of equilibrium, a new normal that's not up for negotiation, in the realm of human relationships, everything is on the table now. We're like a kid who fell off a bicycle and from his new place in the weeds in the ditch, he, she, it concludes that human beings were never meant to travel on wheels, and that everything leading up to the bicycle has been a systematic, entrenched evil. Miners, manufacturers, merchants, the people who thought up bells and streamers on the handlebar to make the whole thing seem cute, other boys and girls who admired you for your shiny red Schwinn with its sexy banana seat and sissy bar, you for desperately wanting them to, and most of all, parents, because moms and dads have for generations perpetuated the oppression of children with bicycles on birthdays. Start pulling on threads like that, and you wind up with a hopeless tangle at your feet and a whole lot of people with no idea which way is up. Sure, she says, and opens the door. How I long for a big hat to go with the boots right now. To slowly put it on, tip the brim, and wink. I remember that from old movies, a way for taciturn cowboys to say, I am what I am. Instead, I just obey and step through the door. Oh, one more thing I say. Be careful with that stuff I brought you. The aroma is guaranteed to offend somebody. This place was never meant to be a permanent home to anyone, except the fishies, perhaps. After the tip, when thawing Arctic permafrost vomited a bazillion tons of methane into the atmosphere in a geologic blink, and the math of what that meant was no longer a matter of opinion, the government suddenly unveiled a string of relocation centers across the country to handle the refugees they knew would eventually head north. Turnkey, ready to go. Almost like somebody saw it coming and prepared accordingly. Only they neglected to mention the fact down at the barber shop on Main Street so real people could get ready too. The idea was, you get a number, and when that number comes up, you present yourself at a nearby relocation center for about a week's worth of in-processing. Then you get on a transport and wait for the first glimpse of your new home to show up in the window, in a place of someone else's choosing. Amazingly, most people complied, spurred, I suspect, by TV images of what a disorderly and ungoverned migration looks like in places like Bangladesh. It was a shit sandwich either way, but here you could at least eat it with napkins in a FEMA cafeteria. At first, I was among the troublesome outliers in the population who said, "Hell no, we won't go." My gnarled old father had recently died, following Mom by about a year. He left me the sole heir to a dusty and weathered little cattle ranch southwest of San Antonio, not far from here. The operation was like a worthless and discarded piece of furniture that, after 10,000 whispered caresses of fine sandpaper and soft cloth and 100 loving coats of oil, suddenly transforms into a family heirloom. I wasn't going to be the one to put it out in the yard to start its journey back to ruin. But two things happened on the same day to propel me to the gates of the hive. The government outlawed cattle ranching, well, the production and consumption of any kind of meat, to curtail further emission of methane, and my son and his wife, significant other, packed one bag for themselves and one for my newborn granddaughter, and resolved to go north. Nearly everyone else I knew had left already, and in the end I chose blood over land and packed up too. That was 5 years ago. Timing, they say, is everything. 2 days after being issued our green uniforms, slippers, and a bed, the government announced a temporary suspension of transports north for reasons that are still unclear. That's also when we noticed that the gates of the hive only open one way, in, and the sturdy fences were topped with concertina that could ruin our new clothes, also for reasons unknown. The fishies who ran the place were politely but firmly determined that we not wander off again. Not that anyone cared at that point. Most settled in to the age-old refugee routine of lining up for food twice a day and waiting for something to happen. Then lining up became all there was to it, period. It was mean and hot out there and sure to get hotter. What else are you going to do? But 6 months ago, something did happen. A superbug infection swept the hive with a particular appetite for children and old people. I survived. Not quite seasoned enough for their taste, I guess. My granddaughter did not. The rhythmic tapping of my boots in the tubular hallway sounds to me like a metronome struggling to revive time itself. I reach my destination and step into a cramped industrial kitchen where a dozen people busy themselves prepping the day's ration of protein meal. I remember seeing this stuff years ago in a documentary about the sad plight of refugees huddled deep in Darfur in western Sudan. Another war over who got to cash in the region's oil had driven everybody from their homes and into United Nations slums. The refugees lined up, dusty bowls in hand. But tears of gratitude were nowhere to be seen. No one flashed a grinning thumbs up at the camera. "Stuff tastes like equal parts Elmer's, Play-Doh, and sand," one sweaty relief worker said. Not an exaggeration, it turns out. I approach a young woman stirring in water to reconstitute the stuff. She's my once-upon-a-time daughter-in-law. At the sound of my boots, she looks up from her work, then down at my feet. She snorts an involuntary little laugh, and in that moment, I feel certain she will make it through. Somehow. A real bee would have scowled and lobbed a snarky comment, or blinked and shuffled on. That little laugh is evidence of her life working its way back to the surface. As my father would have said, probably covered in cow afterbirth after a cold Texas night during calving season, never bet against life. "Sexy, aren't they?" I say, lifting my pants legs to show off the treasure. She cocks her eyebrows and goes back to stirring in a way that says, that's not a word she would have chosen. "What are you doing here?" "It's my birthday." "We're all out of cupcakes. Come back tomorrow." "I'm serious," I say. "I'm throwing a party, and you're invited." She looks me in the eyes now, searching for signs of derangement. It happens in the hive. "I'm okay," I say. "Just be ready." "When?" I lean forward, cup her face with both hands, and kiss her full on the lips. If she doesn't understand now that I'm serious, then God help us. "You'll know. Meet me at the service shaft by the laundry chutes." I spin on my boot heel and head for the door. Before I get there, a man nearly my age steps in to block the way. What hair he has left is gray and frazzled over the ears. "Hey," he says. "Hey." He glances around, then leans closer. "So, when do I get the, you know?" His voice is bleached by an old and ravenous hunger, but not the twitchy kind you used to see in people outside inner-city missions. More like a guy standing in the showroom of an expensive car dealership every Friday evening at the end of another week, working a shitty job to make somebody else rich. His fingertips trace the polished fenders, like a lover taking his time. Deep in his belly, he feels the car grip the road as he accelerates into a turn, feels the G's press his body into leather upholstery, feels cool mountain wind on his face. A lovely woman rides beside him, satisfied in her choice of man. The engine's growl gives a voice to his desire. But the salesmen stay in their glass cubicles. They've seen his kind many times, sleepwalkers who'll never do more than dream. Sorry, I say. Situation's changed. What? There's no threat in his voice, no hostility, just dismay. I should lie to him and say, "Relax, trust me." But I can't. "Supplies moving on," I say. I know he wants to plead. You promised. But this used to be Texas, after all, and he's old enough to have acquired an ingrained aversion to whining long ago. From a tyrannical football coach, maybe, or a girl who once bolted in disgust at the first sign of weakness in him. To appear pathetic in these parts was emotional leprosy. I pat his shoulder as if to say, "Better take it like a man." Without a word, he turns and lifts another 50-pound bag of protein-rich gravel onto a stainless steel table. The metallic wham reverberates through the kitchen. Timing is everything, and I suddenly hope the pocket watch I acquired at the same time as the boots is at least reasonably accurate. There are no clocks in the hive, only digital bells to mark lights up and down, meal times, and occasional government announcements on the TVs that play non-stop. What happens next depends on a level of precision not needed around here for a long time. I surreptitiously checked the watch. 25 minutes to the dinner bell, I think. That means I'm early. Probably. I arrive at the open door to the makeshift classroom where my son now teaches hive kids what they need to know to thrive in the new, tipped world. I lean on the jamb and observe. Inside, children sprawl on the floor, writing in identical notebooks, pencil ends wagging at the ceiling. A board on the wall bears my son's handwriting, in sentences demonstrating the proper use of non-offensive, gender-free pronouns. N-E, ni, equals he, she, it. Ni is an excellent student. Ni apologizes to Nem for the offensive remark. Ner future is bright. Ni likes himself. I try imagining people these words might have described in the lost world. A boy sitting at piano lessons in a room lined with books, feeling weightless in the music. A girl with untamed hair gently prying empty locust shells off of tree bark and putting them reverently in a coffee can. My father's whiskered cheeks, pale and still, on his grandmother's heirloom feather bed the morning he rode off for good. Ner future is bright. Right. I shift my gaze from the kids to my son. He sits on a stool with his back pressed into a corner. He's in charge here, but has the posture and demeanor of a dunce being punished in a fabled 19th century prairie schoolhouse. All that's missing is knickers and a conical hat. The downcast eyes are there, the slumped shoulders, the utter lack of hope, even the belief in hope. This is his default state, in between delivering lectures on the failure of everything. I'd love to blame the tip, to say that temperature and pressure rise in direct proportion to each other, and that things naturally warp under intense stress. But the truth is, this sticky shadow began to descend on him years ago, about halfway through college. That's when he came home and first uttered the words, restitution movement. The idea was that white people had run up a crushing debt to the rest of humanity over the millennia, and the bill had finally come due. Payment could be made in a variety of currencies, but the one most expected of you was an outpouring of shame. His ex-mother all but shouted, "Amen!" since Nee considered himself among the oppressed. After all, we weren't really talking about white people so much as white men. I felt ashamed, all right, especially the night my son informed my father and mother, after a home-cooked meal at their table, that their kind were responsible for incalculable suffering in the world and should immediately donate the ranch to the movement, which would redistribute it to the unspecified underprivileged. "Well," my mom said, "I hadn't thought of that." It would have surprised a great many people in their little town to learn my folks were, in fact, war criminals. The elderly shut-ins Mom visited every week would have been shocked, along with the kids who flocked to the library reading program she created and ran every summer. The disabled veterans of any skin color, whose homes my father fitted with wheelchair ramps at no charge, would have been rendered speechless. I put down my fork and asked the boy why didn't he donate the Firebird his grandfather lovingly restored and presented to him on his 18th birthday, which he promptly did, the very next day. "It was his to give," said my father. I look at my son now, his unfocused gaze far from here, and I wonder, is he thinking about that car? Neon lights coloring the dashboard chrome on a Saturday night? Radio antenna whipping in the wind and gathering up tunes for the road? The perfect lover out there somewhere, worth driving 500 miles to find. I can only hope so. "Hello," says a thin, pleasant voice. I turn to see that 2 fishies have arrived. Both are looking down at my boots, if looking is the right word for what they do with their fiber-optic eyes. "Hello yourself." I make a point of shuffling my feet and tapping the boot heels on the floor. They look up at me. "Hello, you are requested to appear in control." Control is the fishy hive within a hive, not a place I care to go. "No, thank you," I say. "It's my birthday." A pause. Compute that, I think. "You are requested to appear in At last, the dinner bell sounds for about a second, and then the hallway smashes into darkness. "Whoops," I say. Backup lights kick on and wash the scene in dull yellow. One of the fishies grips my forearm, and I'm reminded this thing can politely fuck you up. And time is not on my side. "You are requested." "Okay, happy to oblige, but shouldn't I find out what's wrong with the lights first? I am the sector electrician, after all." Pause. Calculate. "It's my purpose." Whir, hum, click. That does it. In fishy world, everything has an essential purpose, though they might prefer the word function. It releases my arm. I spin and enter the classroom where the kids are huddled around my son. Some are saucer-eyed, but a handful clearly hope this is the day the school burns to the ground, just like the good old days. Those are the ones I want to fit with wings and toss into the air. "Hey," I say to get my son's attention. "I need your help, now." He draws a pair of kids closer like human shields. "Me? I have to stay with the children." I pull a fishy in the door. "Nee will watch them. Come on." "Remain calm," the fishy says. "Calm my ass," I say. "This is an emergency. People are in danger." My son hesitates, calculating. Then he sways forward and breaks free of his adopted purpose. "Keep up," I say, and head down the corridor in a hurry. fast as a gear rarely used in the hive. "Where are we going?" he demands. We reach a door embedded in the wall. I tap in a code on the keypad, and it slides open. Inside, a tubular shaft reaches upward, and a ladder beckons. "Up," I say, and shove him in. "What? How? Son, there's a real possibility this sumbitch is in the process of catching on fire," I say. "You want to reach a consensus or put it out?" "Fine." He starts up the ladder. "But don't call me son." As he ascends, I scan the hallway, where the bees are beginning to stir in the sickly light. My daughter-in-law has about 5 seconds to appear before destiny gets to decide if we ever meet again. "Some party," she says, approaching me from behind. I resist the urge to kiss her again, out of what we used to call joy. "Surprise," I say, and step aside, motioning her up the ladder. She shrugs, a gesture of acceptance without expectation. She climbs, and I follow. At the top of the chute, my son has come to a closed hatch. "Now what?" he says. "It's locked." "Knock," I say. "What?" "Knock." He looks down now and sees his used-to-be lover, wife, and mother of his child peering up at him. It's likely this is the first time they've crossed eyes since their daughter's death. The force of gravity in the chute seems to surge, and the phantom weight of every lost thing bears down hard, threatening to flush us all into oblivion. I'm aware of the watch in my pocket ticking. It comes down to this. We three hang in space, suspended, while this boy-man runs the same old equation that has scored deep tracks in his mind over the years. "There's no fire, is there?" he says. The same old answers flashing in his eyes. I'm weighing the merits of doubling down on the deception versus coming clean when his wife suddenly says, "Knock on the goddamn thing." A pause. "No." Just then, the hatch creaks, pops, and lifts open. A middle-aged Mexican man with a bushy salt and pepper mustache and wide-brimmed cowboy sombrero leans into the circle of stormy sky above us. Wind whips the brim of his hat. "You gringos are late," he says. I am suddenly tempted to kiss him too. "What? No!" My son starts to back down the chute. The man disappears, and 2 younger men take his place. They reach in and haul my son up and out. "Hey! Help! Help!" I climb out into the churning, humid air of a good old-fashioned Texas thunderstorm, just in time to see my son fall to the ground, out of a chokehold that has rendered him unconscious. The Mexican man shrugs at me. "You said if necessary," he says. It was. I can't really argue with that. "Miguel, this is Annie," I say. Miguel removes his hat. "Con mucho gusto." He kisses her hand. "And that's Thomas," I say, pointing to my son. "Those boots are ridiculous on you, amigo," says Miguel. "We should have buried them with Enrique, like I said." Annie laughs beside me, but not at Miguel or my boots. She's got her eyes closed, face turned upward into the belly of the storm, arms out like wings. The wind brushes her hair and she sways in the gusts. A close peal of thunder offers a welcome and a warning to keep moving. Annie opens her eyes. "Now what?" she asks me. I nod toward the hole in the fence I cut weeks ago. Our transport awaits on the other side. My dad's royal blue 1968 Ford F-100 pickup. Thomas wakes up just as we arrive outside my parents' ranch house. He's crammed between Annie and me in the front seat. The truck lurches to a stop and he reaches for his aching head with a moan. It'll pass, I tell him. I get out and hold the door for him. Buy you dinner? He hesitates, and I half expect him to cross his arms, shove out his bottom lip, and say, "No!" like he was prone to do as a toddler. But his lights aren't all back on yet, so he slides out of the truck without a word and follows me to the house. Inside, Annie is immediately wrapped in the protective embrace of Miguel's wife, Consuela. She clucks and coos like a hen pulling a lost chick back into the nest and takes her to a seat at the table. I guide Thomas to a spot across from her. The sound of cooks at work pours through the kitchen door, and I must force myself to remember it's not my mother in there. My father is not in the barn tending to the day's last details. The spare room is not made up for me tonight. Miguel bursts through the front door. "They're pretty spooked," he says. "We better hope the worst of the storm misses us." "Spooked?" Thomas says. "Who?" "Well, this won't calm their nerves any, but it'll do wonders for mine," says Consuela. She sets a half-full bottle of tequila on the table and a tray of glasses. She pours and distributes the shots. Miguel lifts his in a toast. "Salud, compadres." I follow suit, but Thomas has begun to sink into a scowl and doesn't move. Annie watches him, better at predicting his weather changes than anyone alive, I expect. If he's regaining his legs, she'll be the first to know. She downs her tequila. "Tell me something," she says to me. "How did we just walk out of there through a hole in the fence?" "What's that smell?" Thomas says. I ignore him and turn to her. "Turns out, where it really counts, fishies are dumb as lug nuts," I say. "They don't see anything their programming can't explain. Trick is to figure out their blind spots, then you can walk right by 'em." "What's that smell?" Thomas jumps to his feet. The chair falls to the floor behind him. Just then, a teenage boy with bushy red hair and wearing one of my mom's aprons enters, carrying a platter piled high with seared and sizzling meat. He sets it on the table. "It's dinner," I say. "Barbecue brisket, I think." "And cabrito," says Miguel. "Oh, my God!" Thomas sweeps a wild gaze around the room. "You're meat traffickers?" Miguel sits down and strokes his mustache. His two young sidekicks take up positions by the door and look eager to choke Thomas out again, if necessary. "Cattle ranchers," I say. "Herdsmen, if you want a more cross-cultural word for it." "Are you crazy?" He turns to me. You're the one who's been smuggling in beef? Oh, my God!" For a moment, his eyes flash the kind of fire I can work with. It's a fight I'm hoping for, an honest-to-God battle that at least brings us face-to-face, toe-to-toe, man-to-man, under the old rules of engagement. I move closer to him, ready for a fist fight if it comes to that. But neither one of us lands the first blow. Annie knocks back Thomas's glass of tequila. "For God's sake, shut up," she commands. "Quit being a fucking pussy for once." Everyone in the room turns eyes on her. Consuela suppresses a smile. "What?" Thomas says. Annie stands and pushes between me and her husband, getting right in his face. "You heard me. If you say one word right now about saving the world or paying our debts or how you feel about anything, I'm going to put a steak knife in your fucking chest." Time elongates. Electrons in the lightning-charged air hang frozen in their tracks. A tree branch scrapes the side of the house in the wind, and I have to resist running to the barn for a ladder and a saw to cut it off. It's what my father would have done. Then Thomas slowly exhales. His shoulders deflate. His head sags. His eyes drop to the floor, and the transformation is complete. He's resumed the posture of defeat I saw in the classroom. I move to his side, hoping to salvage something of the opportunity I've worked hard to create. As much as I understand her reasons for being angry, I silently curse Annie's timing. Thomas, listen to me, I say. We're finally going north tomorrow, like we set out to do, remember? There's a good herd of fat cattle out there. Miguel and these people have been rounding them up for months, and we're going to drive them north and start over. The world didn't end, Thomas, and it's not going to. It's time to get on with our lives. No response. I brought you here because I don't want to leave without you. I know. I'm flirting with pathetic pleading. Well, fuck it. I love you, son. At that, Thomas slowly inflates again and raises sharpened eyes to meet mine. Suddenly, there it is. The thing I've hoped for. We finally see each other, really see each other, maybe for the first time ever. But the moment is not as I've imagined, and the cold iron truth hits me harder than I'm prepared to bear. Here I stand in ridiculous cowboy boots, hanging in space, suspended, trying to solve an old equation. At last I see the missing variable. And he knows I see it now. He smiles. He's my blind spot. Well, Dad, you're right about one thing, he says. The world didn't end. The front door opens, and 4 armed fishies enter, ever so politely, fanning out. A jolt of adrenaline fires through the room, everyone jumping to fight or flee, but it's too late. Please remain where you are, says a fishy, in a thin, pleasant voice. The world didn't end, Thomas repeats. It was reborn. True to her promise, Annie lunges for a carving knife from the platter of steaming brisket and rushes Thomas with a fierce war cry. Her entire being is a tightly coiled spring of stored rage at the moment of release. Turns out, pulling a trigger requires no fine motor skill at all. A fishy's round strikes her down before her second step. Consuela shrieks and drops to her knees beside Annie. Weapons pivot to her as well, but Thomas raises a hand to stop them. He looks at his fallen lover, and a shadow passes across his face. 10 minutes ago, I'd have interpreted his expression as regret, grief, a potent opening for a change of heart, maybe. Now, we never see clearly what the mind can't explain. Thomas turns back to me and speaks softly in my ear. Happy birthday.